This is part 2 of 3, Introducing Ethics. This presentation will focus on what ethics is not. Ethics is not moral relativism. I once had a coworker tell me, whenever I notice that someone got a haircut, I always tell them, "That's a great haircut." I assume everyone wants to hear something positive, even if their haircut is terrible. His sentiment was admirable. He wanted to give a compliment, and it is always appreciated when someone notices. But knowing what I did after he told me this, his compliment would never be sincere. If he noticed my latest haircut and complimented it, I would have no idea what he actually thought. He might have been silently mocking me, even though he appeared to say something positive. Because he says this to everyone, his basic assertion, as it appears to those who didn't have my insight, is that all haircuts are equally good and equally worthy of complimenting. As a result, his compliment was absolutely meaningless. Moral relativism is the view that notions like right and wrong, good and bad, are relative. On this view, the truth or falsity of moral claims is not objective, but instead depends on some particular standpoint. The standpoint can be individualistic, that is, relative to individuals, or cultural, relative to some culture or cultural perspective. These views are called individual moral relativism or cultural relativism, respectively. On the view of individual relativism, to say something, some action, attitude, or belief, is right means that the individual approves of it, and wrong when the individual disapproves. Something is right according to cultural relativism when a culture approves of it, and wrong when the culture disapproves of it. Many people believe this is all ethics is about. What is right or wrong is shaped by cultural factors or individual preferences. The implication from this is that it's pointless to disagree, according to relativists, because moral disagreement is merely expressing the views of a culture or of an individual. Moral objectivists, by contrast, hold that some moral claims are objective, valid for everyone, and their truth or falsity does not depend on any particular standpoint. Such truths or falsities are universally true or false, independent of any human standpoint. On this view, moral claims are more like the claims of mathematics than like preferences of taste. No one decided that 7 plus 5 equals 12 is true, it just is true. Mathematical concepts in relations, like numbers or 7 plus 5 equals 12, hold universally. They are the same for everyone, everywhere. In other words, they are independent of human convention. Another way to understand the distinction between objectivism and relativism is to ask whether moral claims or beliefs are discovered or invented. Objectivists claim that we discover moral truths. We discover that all persons deserve respect, or that murder is wrong. Relativists view morality as invented, a kind of convention that people make up as they go along. Let's go back to the haircut example. My former coworker's view was a kind of relativism about haircuts. For him, at least according to what he told people, all haircuts were equally good and all received compliment. With the added information I gleaned from him, however, he exposed two fundamental problems with his relativism. First, because he told everyone, "Great haircut," the compliment was absolutely empty. He'd say that to you even if your big brother shaved a bald spot down the middle of your head as a prank while you were asleep. Obviously, that's not a good haircut. This leads to the next problem. My coworker couldn't consistently hold this view on the basis of what he told me in particular. According to him, there really were better or worse haircuts. He genuinely believed that some haircuts were terrible. He just never said it to anyone who got a bad haircut. But he didn't have to compliment all haircuts. He could have simply kept his mouth shut. Where the analogy between good haircuts and moral goodness breaks down is this. What counts as a good haircut is probably a matter of convention. Just look back at the top hairstyles of the 70s, 80s, or 90s. Oh, Topanga. So in that way, they're not like what the objectivist claims about moral matters. But the point is simply that relativism suffers the same problems as my coworker's view on haircuts. It's an incoherent position because it renders moral judgments meaningless, and it is difficult to hold consistently. I'll expand briefly on each of these ideas. First, relativism renders moral judgments meaningless, and thus it is an incoherent position. People fear being judgmental because it often comes across as rude, arrogant, or intolerant. But we should distinguish between being judgmental and using judgment. Moral judgment is absolutely indispensable. We need to determine what we should do, and we often have to reason about what is good or bad, right or wrong. We need to determine whose examples we should follow and whose we should not. There are plenty of examples of people who lack sound judgment in this sense and pay a hefty price for doing so, like Bernie Madoff, who defrauded investors in one of the world's largest Ponzi schemes. But using moral judgment doesn't entail being judgmental. In fact, We need to use moral judgment to determine when, how, and in what way it is appropriate to make and to offer judgments to others. If we care about not being rude, arrogant, or intolerant, we need judgments to determine how best to do that, and to analyze our successes and failures in this realm. But to believe that we can't make moral judgments, or that all moral judgments are equal, and thus we should only make positive judgments, is a mistake that results in incoherence. Like my acquaintance, we might shun negative judgments, but without negative judgments, positive judgments have no meaning. Consider the participation trophy. Second, relativism is a difficult position to hold consistently. My coworker's view betrayed his own position in the concession that he sometimes thought haircuts were terrible. He held a measure of objective judgment, even if he scarcely let it show. When people make moral judgments and moral claims, like unprovoked violent aggression is wrong, they often don't simply mean that it is just their opinion. They view it as objectively true, claiming that when some person attacks another, the aggressor has done something wrong. And the wrongness of such action provides justification for self-defense, which might not otherwise be permissible. Likewise, when two people disagree, say over abortion, they aren't merely examining or expressing their own approval or disapproval about it, they are substantively disagreeing. If individual relativism were true, then when person A says abortion is wrong and person B says abortion is permissible, they would simply be saying, I disapprove of abortion, and I approve of some abortion, respectively. If relativism is true, then there actually is no disagreement here, they are just expressing their mental states. But when two people are arguing over abortion, they seem to be saying that either abortion is objectively wrong or objectively permissible. Person A, for instance, thinks it's wrong for anyone to get an abortion. She is not simply saying that she wouldn't personally like to do it. And person B probably doesn't really approve of abortion, since few supporters would recommend abortions or think that the world is a better place with more abortions. Rather, a supporter of abortion thinks that some circumstances warrant abortion. Circumstances like rape, incest, or a threat to the mother's life. And thus, it should be permissible for women to seek. So relativism totally misses the nuance in the viewpoints and mischaracterizes genuine disagreement as expressing mental states. This inaccurately describes what is going on when disagreement happens. Finally, people who are attracted to the view of relativism are often concerned about being tolerant to differences, especially when determining who is right is difficult. The view of my former coworker was a kind of disingenuous blind tolerance. What we need instead, at least in the moral realm, is critical tolerance. Tolerance is a good thing, but it also has limits. Some moral actions are genuinely worthy of praise, others are genuinely worthy of rebuke and censure. Again, we need to use sound judgment to determine what we ought to tolerate and what we ought not to tolerate. What's important to learn is how to offer and analyze reasons in support of a particular viewpoint. And some reasons are better or worse than others. Some fit better with existing evidence and are more or less consistent with other established beliefs. In short, moral relativism may appear to be a plausible way to understand morality and moral disagreement. Ultimately, however, it is incoherent and inconsistent with the evidence. It is incoherent because uncritical acceptance of all moral claims is meaningless. It is inconsistent because we tend to believe that at least some things are objectively right or wrong, good or bad, and as a result, when we disagree about morality or moral matters, we are actually having substantive disagreement. Moral relativism simply cannot capture this, since it reduces disagreement to talking past each other in merely reporting our mental states.